Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Political Pulse. I'm your host, Joseph Goodman. Due to popular demand, this 30-minute show is coming back to you for its second season. Today is the inaugural day. People were yearning, and, I'm a man of the people, so I give the people what they want. And I think the people will enjoy what I have to offer. None other than my good friend, Drew Morrison. Drew, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Joseph?
Not too bad. I really appreciate you coming into the studio. I think we're going to have a lot of fun here over the next 30 minutes. You've come in today to talk to me a bit about New Haven politics. I'm excited. But before we delve into any of the questions, we first must, of course, establish your credibility. So, Drew, give us the resume. Who are you? Where do you come from? What has been your involvement here in New Haven over the past 3 years or so?
Great. Well, I think I should start with the lineage. I was born here in New Haven. My mom was born here as well, and she's a real townie, went to Southern Connecticut State. My dad came here for law school, went to Yale Law, and then after serving as head of New Haven Legal Assistance, he was the congressman from the 3rd District for 4 terms in the 1980s. I actually only spent about 3 years in the New Haven area, and then we moved down to Washington, D.C. area, but I've always had a bit of a connection to New Haven. So that's the pedigree I have. I always like to start with that when you're in the community or somewhere, to know that I'm both a Yalie and a townie. Since coming to Yale, though, I've been very involved in a variety of community activities, community organizing in New Haven. And it really began with an effort to help homeowners who are facing foreclosure. And for the last 3 years or so, we've been visiting the homes of people who are undergoing the foreclosure process and directing them to the free help that's available through the state and through the city to help keep people from losing their homes. And when people lose their homes to foreclosure, we see such terrible problems of crime, of destruction of the tax base of cities that in turn keeps it from being able to help others. So that's really where I got my start since coming here, to focusing on foreclosure issues.
I'm curious to hear more about this. So tell me a bit about these foreclosure homes, all right? Granted, you're foreclosed upon. Misery, terrible. I can only imagine the consequences of that. But what are the steps that can be taken to avoid that?
Well, that's a great question. These days, it can really take 6 to 12 to 18 months for the foreclosure process to complete itself. From the moment that the bank says, we're going to take your home, to when you're actually evicted, that's quite a long time. There are these programs where, and there's one in New Haven called the Roof Project, where essentially you meet with what's called a HUD counselor, someone who's been certified.
The HUD stands for?
Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Right.
So they've been certified by the federal government to assist people who are having problems with their mortgages, and then they go into negotiations essentially with the bank to try to create an arrangement where your monthly payments are reduced but the mortgage is extended, for example, so that you're able to make the monthly payments and keep your house.
And where do you and your group come into the equation?
What we do is about every 4 weeks we go out with a list of all the new foreclosures, or what's called lis pendens, so properties in the process of being foreclosed upon, and we give them the information about these programs, and we try to impart on them 2 main things. 1, that there is help available, and credible help, and 2, that they shouldn't have to pay, that these are free services that are available, and that people who are telling you to pay are more likely scammers. They are people who are trying to take your $2,000 and run away with it, as opposed to actually solving your mortgage problems.
So you're like the middleman.
We are the middleman.
The foreclosed ones are the A, HUD is the C, and you're the B.
Exactly. We are, because at the organizational level, we have the HUD counselors who have huge numbers of clients. We have the organization in charge of trying to get more people to these HUD counselors, but they're kind of managing it from inside the office, and they don't have the hours to really get out into the community. We are the main outreach for this sort of service in the New Haven area.
What kind of numbers are we looking at here? How many new names and houses are added to your foreclosure lists? Can you give me a percentage here in New Haven? Is New Haven particularly worse than other cities of comparable size?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know how we compare vis-a-vis other cities. I think we have a marginally weaker home ownership situation than...
What do you mean by that?
I would say we have a fair bit of foreclosures because kind of middle and working class people who were affected by the downturn were the people who are buying homes, particularly on the east shore of New Haven, so across the Quinnipiac River, not quite in East Haven yet, but still in New Haven on the east shore. You had a lot of particularly Hispanic and black people who were kind of buying their first home, and that didn't go so well. But it's not been as bad as we've seen out in California, where foreclosures have essentially led to municipal bankruptcies because of the loss of tax base. But for example, we're going to be going out this weekend, and it's been since the fall, really the beginning of the winter, first semester, that we've been able to get out there because of the way schedules work. And I would say we have about 50 houses on our list, and that 2 years ago we were seeing about 300 foreclosures per year. That's gone down a little bit. So we've had the opportunity to reach about 200 homes, if not more, probably 300 by now, from the work we've been doing.
And the type of people that are being foreclosed upon, these are people that just lost their jobs. Can you tell me a bit about this demographic of people beyond just they're poor?
Right. And they're not that poor.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this work is so much service, and it's not a bad thing. So much service is about the very poor. Obviously, they're the one who need the most help, but it can be very easy to overlook the people who are on the brink of being poor, and those are really people who are in scary situations with their homes. These are people who could have been middle class, upper middle class, and now are teetering from working class down to poverty.
Are these people that are just wealthy enough to not qualify for Section 8 housing? Would that be correct?
I would say
Section 8 housing, of course, being
subsidized housing, rental assistance. You're not in a housing project, but you are receiving assistance to afford your rent. They are and they aren't. I think they're probably wealthier than that. A lot of what it is that they got subprime mortgages, so they had bad credit.
Right.
Regardless of how wealthy they were, they had bad credit. They were steered to a subprime mortgage, and then the rate shot up. I think that's the main thing we see, that people are having to pay more than they were, and maybe one or two of the people of the husband and wife got laid off. But I really think it's the hitting of the escalating rates as part of the subprime mortgage that probably had the biggest impact.
And I have a bit of personal experience with these matters. This past summer, I worked in Washington, D.C., and we actually met up there, and that's going to lead me to my next question. But when I was working in Washington, D.C., I was working with Americans for Financial Reform, and for a few weeks there, I was doing a lot of policy work and research and memoing on mortgage modifications as part of Obama's stimulus package, as part of HUD programs and etc. And it's fascinating stuff. But I was wondering if we met up in Washington, D.C., and you're working on something quite different than what you are usually working on here. What were you working on in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so I was working for Montgomery County on transportation policy.
And that's where you live right now when you're not at Yale?
So that's a semi-suburban county of about 1 million people just outside of Washington, D.C. I live in what's called Bethesda, which is where the National Institutes of Health is, for example. There I was primarily working on a program to create a bus rapid transit system. Now, people may be familiar with subway systems like New York City, the Washington Metro. They may be familiar with your typical bus you see out on the New Haven Green. The idea of bus rapid transit is, how do we take the relative affordability of bus infrastructure but make it so that it's faster, it's more reliable, and also it attracts riders from across the economic spectrum. So basically there are you give them their own lanes. When they come up to a traffic intersection, they have this little switch they can push that changes the timing of the light so that the buses can go through quicker. You have stations where the platform is raised so you don't have to step up or maybe trip getting on the bus, and where you pay your fare off the bus as opposed to if you've ever had that situation going on the bus where there's that one person who doesn't have exact change and you can't find your Smart Trip card. Trying to make the bus experience better so that it drives economic development and drives real ridership. That's what we're working on. It's not been approved yet by the county council, but I think it's something that municipalities across the country are looking at really seriously.
Is there a theme I'm noticing between your work on foreclosures and your work in transportation, namely work when it comes to urban city planning?
I have huge interest in urban development, and I have huge interest in making sure that urban development is equitable.
And you're taking a class, I believe, on urban development in China. Tell us a bit about that.
That's a fascinating subject. I mean, if you're thinking about urban development in the world, you have to think about China. It has over 100 cities with over 1 million people. And
how many? I missed that. How many did you say?
Over 100 cities with over 1 million people.
Now, and in America, how many? Maybe a few? Half a dozen? 9?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you have huge scale there. You have huge issues of inequality, especially because there, if you're familiar with it, there's this idea of hukou, which is that some people have a right to live in a city, whereas some people have a right to live in the countryside or in another city. And so that migration, especially for poorer people, is sort of this internal illegal migration situation. So these people don't have rights, they don't have housing rights, they can't send their kids to the local school. So you have that inequality issue emerging out of this sort of post-socialist state, and then you have the size and scope of it, which means finding jobs for people, dealing with the environmental issues, moving people. I mean, we've seen a huge rise in car ownership, not only in China, but also in India, where I've done some research. And that's a huge issue, because if everyone in China has a car and they drive like we do, I mean, those tides are going to rise.
I bet. To bring us a bit back, back to America, I want to leave our discussion on China. I want to know a bit more about other things in New Haven that you do. Okay, so we've talked about a bit about your Montgomery experiences and your interest in urban planning. But what you do here in New Haven involves a bit more than just foreclosures, would you say?
That's absolutely right. And I've had the opportunity with which I got to first really work with Joseph here was on work in the Dixwell neighborhood on an idea called community mapping. And that comes from the idea of police hotspot mapping, that crimes, think of a high crime neighborhood in wherever you live. Crime doesn't happen everywhere. It happens in space, a particular space, at a particular time. And by mapping that, we can better understand what the factors are that are related to this crime and what's causing this crime, and how can we target just not policing resources, but urban development resources to target those hotspots of crime. So I did a study for the Dixwell neighborhood looking at crime hotspots, housing issues, and how those tied together. And I've also done a similar thing for a more Hispanic neighborhood in the city called Chatham Square, looking at similar issues. And the goal of all this is to come up with cost-effective solutions. So in Dixwell, we worked a bit on finding where the best place to light in the neighborhood was. How could we overcome crime issues by providing security on the street through better lighting? And then the other related project that I'm working on there is this idea of health hotspots. So in Camden, New Jersey, a doctor, Jeff Brenner, found that people who go to the ER, when you map them out, it looks like a crime hotspot map. That the housing project, which has all that crime, also has a lot of very sick people in it. Senior housing, which hopefully doesn't have as much crime, has a lot of sick people in it. And that the people who are going to the ER aren't going once or twice. They're going 5 or 10 times in a 5-year period, even as much as, I believe one person, 170 times in a 5-year period. So if you can capture that population and deal with them individually, you can reduce healthcare costs considerably. So that's something.
And in Camden, a success story there.
A total success story. I mean, millions of dollars of healthcare spending. Just unnecessary healthcare spending. People who have asthma and it just balloons because they don't treat it. That person's not going to the ER anymore. People with diabetes who weren't treating it. Those people aren't going to the ER anymore. solving our health crisis, which is largely also a financial crisis, depends upon reducing costs in a way that doesn't hurt care. And Jeff Brenner did that in Camden, and we're working to build a coalition to do that here in New Haven as well.
And this coalition, tell me, I mean, what is the time scale going on here? What are things, tangible things that you're doing right now? You mentioned when you're doing all that foreclosure stuff that you're knocking on doors. Are you trying to raise awareness with these hotspots in Dixville?
Well,
what exactly is the game plan? That's my question.
That's a great question. I think the game plan is twofold. First, it's to build consensus and community in the health providers side. So actually, we've been working with Yale School of Public Health. We have a map of health hotspots, just like Jeff Brenner had his map of Camden health hotspots. So we know the actual places. So we have the information. We did the information collecting, and a lot of the other variables that informed my previous work, housing, crime hotspots, we integrated those in. So that was the first step. The step now is kind of building the political support. We've been talking with individuals about perhaps locating such a program that would focus on this in one of the new community centers that people are looking to develop, particularly the Goff Street Armory. We'd like to get involved in that process of making sure that health, even if our program is not included in the Goff Street Armory, because I'd say it's still some time away from being fully formed, that this sort of idea of reshaping healthcare is on the minds of the political leaders, because I think it generally is. But to give people, especially some of the new aldermen who have been elected, an idea of what specifically could be done would be very powerful and effective as we go into, a new mayor and another election season, and new ideas that will come out of that.
I think that's actually a perfect transition. You gave it to me as a softball there, talking about political leaders, talking about the new Board of Aldermen, talking about the mayoral elections. What kind of insight do you have to offer in the success of this new Board of Aldermen that was elected 2 years ago? The numbers there, I believe, a board of 30 older people. How many of them were new?
I think it was 20 total.
20 new older persons representing 2 years ago. Can you tell me a little bit about successes, legislative successes that have come out of this new body, largely new body? And then after that, tell me a little bit about the mayoral race and what are you doing, how are you involved in that? Who do you think is going to win? Anything that you can have to offer on that front.
Well, those are great questions, big questions.
They're big questions.
So about the new board, I would say the success first was the repositioning of the Board of Aldermen as an active force for both as a counterbalance to things that the mayor might want, but also of really what they should be. When you're representing 5,000 people, you should be very much focused on what is your community clamoring for. And I think that was the first success of just rethinking what the board should do and what should be focused on. That pressure, though it wasn't legislative, I think really pushed Mayor DeStefano to bring in Dean Esserman to be the new police chief, because this new board was talking about policing and crime. And even before they were elected, he brings in Chief Esserman, or before they were seated.
What is the significance of bringing in Esserman?
Esserman was involved in the initial round of community policing in New Haven. So that happened in 1990 when John Daniels was mayor. He was the first black mayor. He appointed Nick Pastor as police chief. Pastor had been a kind of disgruntled member of the police force during its more controversial days. And he was brought to instill real community policing. Districts, so there are 10 police districts that are controlled by their district manager, that are accountable to a community management team and hopefully also the local citizens. The walking of beats, the end of semi-militaristic police tactics. There used to be a thing in the 1980s called the beatdown posse, which did exactly that. So Esserman was brought on as an assistant chief to help deal with some of the older guard at the time who were not so fond of this new soft form of policing as they saw it. So he's been brought back, and he's a believer in community policing. He's a believer in that what the community has to say matters. I mean, he gave a master's tea at Brantford College where he quoted Malcolm X. I don't know how many white police chiefs in the United States quote Malcolm X with any frequency. So that was one of the...
Do you remember the line from Malcolm X?
Well, it was fascinating. He was talking about the amount of violence that we have. And he brought the line that Malcolm X said, actually, about John F. Kennedy's assassination, about chickens coming home to roost, and that how if we sow a violent society, we're going to have murders on the street. I thought that was very powerful. And so I think that sort of pressure, that repositioning, something the Board of Aldermen did very well. I think the pursuing of these community centers, not finished, but pushing us that way, success. And I would say the jobs pipeline is probably the single biggest legislative success you could see. This is an idea to link employers with unemployed New Haveners, figure out exactly what the training that's needed is, get them that training, and get buy-in, whereby Yale and other big entities in the city are really part of this and going through this pipeline to get their new talent. I think there's a lot to be, in terms of what I would say in terms of failures or questions, there's a lot to be done still. 2 years is a short term, and you have a lot to learn very quickly when you had 20 new board members. The budget happened very quickly. So I think there's a lot of education and learning and experience building that needs to go on among the Board of Aldermen too, to make sure that they're covering all the bases. But I think it's been successful in its repositioning, and so the next 2 years will be very interesting to see.
Can I jump in with a question? What is Sarah Idelson's role in all this been? I think that Yale students will find it particularly interesting to hear about the Yale representative on the board.
Great question. Sarah's been focused on youth issues. She's led along with...
She's the chair.
Yes, of the youth committee. She has also been leading an effort with another alderwoman by the name of Claudette Robinson-Thorpe on the reopening of the Gough Street Armory as a community center. That's just about 2 blocks from the Popeyes. And so she's been a leader on getting youth issues on the agenda as well. There was an article written about speculation and what did people think, and I think the main critique that's come is just that she hasn't been as visible on campus as people would like. I think that's tough when you're an alderman, you have a job as well, you're not an enrolled student, but I think that people should recognize also that she's been a real leader among her peers in pushing for an issue that I think Yale students feel really good about, which is that people in our community who have not had the same opportunities as us, making sure that there's something to kind of bridge that gap. And community centers are a huge way to do that. How do you, when I was working in Dixwell, we knew that the biggest period of the day for crime is that after school, after work hour. So if we can't do something to get young people in a positive situation in that hour and those hours, we are facing a lot of trouble because people will get wrapped up in things that will put them back for the rest of their lives.
Is Idelson considering running for re-election? The whole board's up for re-election in November. I felt it an appropriate question to ask.
It's an appropriate question to ask.
Has she announced anything?
She has not announced anything, and then that's her choice to make. She told the Yale Daily News that she would wait perhaps even until the summer.
Really, that long? Wow.
I think she should make the choice that's appropriate for her. I think there are a lot of people who would love to see her run again. I think she'll need to redo that sort of outreach she did 2 years ago and build that back up. But I think a lot of people would say has experience on the board and she's working on good issues that aren't going to be finished by January. So it would make some sense for her to run again if she thinks that's right for her. The other side might say that an enrolled student should represent Ward 1 because it is the enrolled student's ward.
I think I have somebody in mind. Wink, wink. Excuse me there. Sarah Idelson, we're unsure. whether she's going to decide to run or not. But we do know for sure that Mayor John DeStefano will no longer be running. Tell me, of the people that have thrown their hats into the ring, we have
Gary Holder Winfield.
Gary Holder Winfield, and then the alderman for Ward.
Justin Elliker.
Justin Elliker, who are right now probably at the forefront of the race. I mean, it's still in its early stages, but you have these two candidates. Who are we waiting for, and what are you thinking?
Well, I think there are two major names that we're waiting for. I mean, I should say there have been some other people of note who have been rumored about. Before I get to these two big names, there's Kermit Carolina, who's
the principal
of Hill House High School, was a foe of John DeStefano, still is a foe of John DeStefano, suggested running. So I don't know how seriously people take that candidacy.
Why don't they take it seriously?
Well, I think because, the reason that Kermit Carolina was most recently in the news is because of a grade tampering scandal, and he claims that it was a political coup, but that's very difficult for you to come out of. I was accused of tampering students' grades, so vote for me for mayor.
doesn't ring very well, does it? Wouldn't make for a good poster slogan. I
don't think so. But the two big names that people are waiting for are George Perez, who's the president of the Board of Aldermen, and of whom it's expected that the Yale unions and the Democratic Town Committee would endorse. Obviously, Joseph, you'd have some impact on that. And then the other person...
Try to explain,
Well, there's a convention in the summer where all the members of the ward committees, Joseph is...
I'm privileged enough to represent the 22nd ward,
which is a fine ward covering parts of Dixwell and also Yale students. And they would make an endorsement at the convention of whichever candidate, the co-chairs voted for, the majority of the co-chairs voted for. So George Perez is a big factor, as is Martin Looney, who's currently majority leader of the state Senate, represents the east part of New Haven, basically like the green and east, and is very popular as well.
Assuming that these four people decide to run, who would you throw your hat behind? Who would you canvass for? Who would you knock on doors and phone bank for, and why?
That's a great question. I'm still up in the air on some fronts. I think what I'll say is, just to go quickly through everyone, Gary is a great legislator, and I think he's raised a lot of issues like the death penalty.
He was very instrumental in passing the ban on death penalty.
He was
during his first term in office, first few years in office. Yeah,
he has focused on that issue. It's a great issue, and he accomplished it. And I think he is much to be proud of. His biggest enemy is that I think a lot of people would say he's a great state legislator. Keep him in the state legislature.
I see.
I think I like Justin a lot. I think he's a smart alderman. He's a great in terms of constituent services. He needs to appeal to people on what I'd call the other side of the hill. He represents East Rock. He will need to prove that he can represent the issues of people in New Hallville, in Dixwell, in the Hill, in Fairhaven, the poor minority parts of town as well. Then, I think with the other two, they're older. We need guards. We need to see the new ideas as well. So I'm kind of ambivalent on some level. I will be involved in the campaigns. I'd like to see everyone who is running and who's talking about good issues. Right now, between Justin and Gary, I really like Justin comparatively because I think he's got a grip on particularly budget issues that people haven't thought about. But I'd like to see if Martin or George are running as well, and then I'll evaluate from there. And I think a lot of people are going to be evaluating.
So there remains the big question mark. And I think that's a great way to end off, in fact. It's been a very quick 30 minutes. You folks out there got a nice, short, intensive crash course. New Haven Politics 101. Drew, I want to thank you so much for coming on. If you want to get in contact with Drew Morrison, if you are interested in anything that he's doing, whether it comes to foreclosures, whether it comes to Montgomery transportation systems, urban planning in China, his email address, I hope I have permission to give this out, Who knows? Somebody might email you.
Who knows?
It's Drew, DREW.Morrison, common spelling, 2 R's, SON, at Yale.edu. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to take your call, respond to your email, and grab a coffee. Drew, I want to thank you very much for your time. Folks, I think this went really well. We're back and we're hitting our stride. Please join me next week, 4 p.m., Tuesday. That would be the 26th. Thank you, Drew. Drew, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we're out.